Hello. Sorry, I have a sore throat. Well, I'm glad to see that some of you made it to here after last night. So today I'm going to talk about brain networks in UKbiobank, polygenic risk scores for schizophrenia, and psychotic-like experiences. So as you probably know, schizophrenia is highly heritable, and is characterized by auditory hallucinations and delusions, which might also be accompanied by brain structure and function impairments. However, the link between these two is not always is proven elusive. However, on the other hand, we know that psychotic-like experiences are also present in 5 to 8% of the general population, which validates the study of the pathophysiology in the non-clinical populations. Therefore, assessing genetic risk factors, psychotic-like experiences, or PLS here, in non-clinical populations and their biological underpinnings can offer valuable insights into mechanisms without the potential confounds that we can find, for example, in schizophrenia, and also its treatment, such as the medication. Therefore, the aim of this study that I was conducting while I was at the Edinburgh University doing my PhD was to investigate the polygenic risk scores for schizophrenia, psychotic-like experiences, and how they relate to neuroanatomical properties of brain networks in a large population sample. So for that purpose, we investigated 3 networks that have been previously implicated in schizophrenia. They either be structural or functional networks, which are the salience network, the default mode network, and the central executive network. I'm just going to go through a little bit through methods a bit fast. So we use UKbiobank, probably you all know about this. So it's a prospective cohort study with deep genetic, physical, and health data, and that was collected through United Kingdom. So at the time, due to quality control and processing time, we were able to derive 3,875 morphometric data, and out of those, we were able to construct the structural connectome for 3,174 of these participants. And also, just as a reminder, we excluded anyone in UKbiobank who had any diagnosis of a psychotic disorder. So although I'm not going to go through in much detail about how we reconstruct the structural connectome today, and Dr. Colin Buchanan, who is somewhere around here, is presenting a poster, so you can go on all and see his poster, where he will talk about this. But however, I want to highlight that we selected nodes based on the literature that belong or has been described to belong to any of these 3 networks, so the salience network, the default mode, and central executive. And then I translated those nodes into our parcellation, which was the Desikan Kiliani Atlas. And we constructed, through tractography, the connections between those nodes that we selected. So we had, at the end, fractional isotropy, weighted connectivity matrices, and we used a consistency-based threshold. So basically, at the end, what we had for each of the networks was, for each node of the network, the cortical thickness and the gray matter volume, and then the connections between them. So we had, for the edges, the fractional anisotropy connecting them. So for the polygenic risk score analysis, we use a multiple indicator, multiple causes model for the latent factors, sort of like a structural equation modeling, where you can see here, for example, is, I don't think I can point this, anyway. You can see that so we have a model per network, so one model for the salience network, and for each of these networks, we have 3 models. One for cortical thickness, one for gray matter volume, and one for fractional anisotropy. So here is an example where we take each of the nodes, so for each of the nodes that belong to the network, for cortical thickness, and we derive a latent factor for cortical thickness of this network. And then we regress it on polygenic risk scores for schizophrenia at different polygenic risk scores thresholds. We also regress this onto the interaction between polygenic risk scores and age separately. Moreover, we also conducted a common plus independent model, where we wanted to test is whether each of these networks was best described at the general level, or whether there were any additional paths with specific components that I can show you with this link. So we regress also a direct regression between each node and polygenic risk scores for schizophrenia, and another direct regression with the interaction, or whether this network were best described by independent pathways, and this was done through general linear models with individual nodes. For the analysis with psychotic-like experiences, because there was, well, due to the low frequency of participants who answered yes to any of the psychotic-like experiences questionnaire in UKbiobank, we decided to match participants 1 to 10 using a propensity score method based on age and sex. And we associated this with brain structure. So if you look at UKbiobank questionnaire on psychotic-like experiences, well, I don't know if you know about it, but you can classify these questions in unusual visions, unusual voices, conspiratorial thoughts, unusual signs or communications, and ever being prescribed medication for any of these symptoms. And finally, we did a mediation model whereby we wanted to test whether the association between polygenic risk score for schizophrenia and psychotic-like experiences was mediated through brain structure. So I'm going to basically explain the results based on each network separately, so it makes a little more sense and you don't get lost. So for the salience network, and this is just a diagram showing each of the nodes that we selected for the network, and the links or edges that you're seeing are proportionate to the fraction isotropy value that connects each node. So we found a significant association between the latent factor for cortical thickness and polygenic risk score for schizophrenia at a threshold of 0.1, and this was a negative association. And we also found a significant independent path which improved the model fit between the interaction between polygenic risk score and age and the cortical thickness of the right caudal anterior cingulate. And we also found through regressions a significant association between the right insular cortex and polygenic risk scores for schizophrenia at a threshold of 0.1. And for psychotic-like experiences, we found significant association between the cortices of the right and left insula and unusual voices. Both of them were negative. And also between ever being prescribed medication with the cortical thickness of the right caudal anterior cingulate and the volume of the left amygdala. For the default mode network and central executive, here you can see the diagram for the default mode network. And we found that for psychotic-like experiences, an association between unusual signs and the volume of the right supramarginal, and between conspiratorial thoughts and volume of the left pars orbitalis and the cortical thickness of the right supramarginal. And for the central executive network, we just found a regression which was significant between the volume of the right inferior parietal and polygenic risk scores at two thresholds, 0.5 and 1. However, we did not find any significant associations with fraction isotropy, so white matter. Here I'm just showing some ring cloud plots whereby you can see that the orange represents those participants who have answered yes to any psychotic symptom, and in green would be their match controls. So you can see that also for the different morphometric parameters, there are group differences that are significant. So for example, those participants who answer yes to having experience an unusual voice, you can see a significant difference between those who answer yes and those who answer no for cortical thickness of the insula, and so on. And the mediation results, we found that the association between polygenic risk scores for schizophrenia and unusual voices was significantly mediated by the cortical thickness of the right insula, and this was across all polygenic risk score thresholds. And we saw that the right insular cortex mediated between 80 and 125% of the association. I know it sounds strange, but a mediation over 100% can happen whether the sigma parameter change of sign. And this happens for two of our thresholds, for 0.5 and 1. Therefore, just the key concepts are that the results that I presented are consistent with the hypothesis that higher genetic liability for schizophrenia is related to subtle neurostructural impairments even among healthy participants. And this study also offers support for the notion that nodes engaged during auditory verbal hallucinations, such as the insula, shows structural associations with psychotic-like symptoms in the general population. Overall, this research indicates that the study of the non-clinical phenotype represents a valid approach to investigate the etiology of the clinical phenotype, in this case, schizophrenia. Well, thank you to people from Edinburgh University, from Madrid, that is where I'm now, and University of Texas. And if you have any questions,